Part 1. The morning started like any other morning on New Harmony. The twin suns rose over the green valleys and the silver cities that humans had built over 15 years. 3 million people lived on this colony world, working in farms, factories, and offices. Children went to school. Parents kissed them goodbye. Nobody knew that this would be the last normal day of their lives. Jacob Morris was checking the readings on his fusion reactor when the alarm started screaming. He looked up at the sky through the transparent dome of the power plant. What he saw made his blood turn cold. The sky was black, not with clouds or smoke, but with ships. Thousands of alien ships, each one the size of a city block, hanging in the atmosphere like metal locusts. Helen Carter was the colony administrator. She had managed New Harmony for 7 years and loved every person on this world like family. When the attacks began, she ran to the communications center. Her hands shook as she activated the emergency broadcast system. She had to warn Earth. She had to let humanity know what was happening. The alien weapons fired without warning. Beams of purple energy sliced through the orbital defense platforms like they were made of paper. The platforms exploded in brilliant balls of fire that lit up the morning sky. Helen watched the destruction through the window and felt her heart sink. Those platforms were supposed to protect them. They lasted less than 5 minutes. The aliens landed their ships in every major city. The cargo doors opened and the creatures came out. They looked like enormous insects, standing 3 meters tall on 6 legs. Their bodies were covered in black armor that seemed to be part of their skin. They had 4 arms, each ending in claws that could tear through steel. Their heads were triangular with compound eyes that glowed red in the sunlight. Kyle Bennett was a lieutenant in the Colonial Guard. He had joined the military to see the galaxy, not to fight a war. But when the aliens started killing civilians in the streets, he didn't hesitate. He gathered every soldier he could find and set up a defensive line at the Eastern District. They had rifles, grenades, and determination. It wasn't nearly enough. The aliens moved in coordinated groups, communicating through clicks and chirps that hurt human ears. Their weapons dissolved flesh on contact, leaving nothing but ash where people had been standing. Kyle watched his friends die around him. He watched civilians running for their lives, screaming for help that wouldn't come. He kept fighting because it was the only thing left to do. Helen managed to send one message before the communications array exploded. The blast threw her across the room and she hit the wall hard. Pain shot through her ribs, but she forced herself to stand. Through the broken window, she could see the aliens moving through the streets below. They were taking everything. Technology, resources, even bodies. This wasn't just an attack. This was harvesting. Jacob tried to shut down the reactor safely, but the aliens had other plans. A group of them broke into the power plant, their weapons raised. Jacob grabbed a pipe wrench and swung it at the nearest alien. The wrench bounced off its armor without leaving a scratch. The alien looked at him with those horrible red eyes and raised its weapon. Jacob closed his eyes and thought of his wife and daughter. He hoped they had made it to the shelters. Kyle held his position for 6 hours. His ammunition was running low and more than half his soldiers were dead. The aliens kept coming in endless waves. He could hear the screams from the underground shelters where thousands of civilians were hiding. He had to give them more time. Just a little more time to find a way off this planet. When Kyle finally fell, he took 12 aliens with him. He detonated the grenades on his belt when they rushed his position. The explosion shook the ground and brought down part of a building. It didn't matter. More aliens simply walked over the rubble and continued their advance. By sunset, New Harmony was silent. The beautiful cities were burning. The green valleys were scorched black. The aliens had killed everyone they could find and taken everything of value. Their ships lifted off from the planet, leaving behind only death and destruction. But 200 people survived. They had been working on cargo ships in orbit when the attack began. They watched helplessly as their world died below them. When the alien fleet finally left, they flew their damaged ships down to search for survivors. They found none, only bodies and ruins. The captain of one freighter was named Richard Stone. He had lost his entire family in the attack. His hands shook as he recorded the evidence of what happened. His camera captured the destroyed cities, the alien footprints in the ash, the bodies of people he had known. This recording had to reach Earth. Humanity had to know about this threat. The journey to Earth took 3 weeks. The freighters barely held together, their engines sputtering and dying. Richard didn't sleep. He couldn't sleep. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the aliens killing his family. He saw Helen Carter's final message. He saw Kyle Bennett's last stand. He saw the end of New Harmony. When the ships finally reached Earth's outer system, they broadcast their distress signal. The response came within minutes. The Earth Defense Force sent ships to escort them to the lunar station. Richard and the other survivors were taken to hospitals, but their bodies weren't what needed healing. The recordings from New Harmony were shown to the world leaders in Geneva. The underground war room fell silent as they watched 3 million people die. Admiral Vincent Cole stood at attention, his jaw clenched tight. President Laura Manning covered her mouth with her hand. Nobody spoke. There was nothing to say. Then the reports started coming in from other colonies. 12 more worlds had gone dark. The same aliens had attacked them all at the same time. Millions more humans were dead or missing. The attacks had been coordinated across 100 light-years of space. This wasn't a random raid. This was an invasion. Admiral Cole pulled up files that had been classified for 20 years. Project Dragon. A contingency plan for threats that everyone hoped would never come. Massive warships with weapons that pushed the boundaries of human technology. Ships built for one purpose: total war. President Manning looked at the plans and then at the footage of New Harmony burning. She made her decision. Humanity would not go quietly into extinction. They would fight back with everything they had. The order went out across the solar system. Activate Project Dragon. Part 2. The asteroid belt had always been home to miners and refinery workers, people who lived their lives in the cold darkness between Mars and Jupiter. But now the belt transformed into something else entirely. The mining stations became weapons factories. The refineries started producing metamaterial armor instead of steel. Every rock with valuable metals was stripped clean to feed the war machine. Patrick Hughes had been a cargo ship captain before the aliens came. He had spent 15 years hauling supplies between colonies, living a quiet life that he loved. When New Harmony fell, he volunteered for military service immediately. His sister had lived on that world with her 2 children. The aliens took them all. Now Patrick stood in the construction bay of Forge Station Alpha, staring at something that seemed impossible. The Crimson Fury stretched 2 kilometers from front to back. Its hull was dark red, made from materials that could absorb and redirect energy across the entire surface. The ship looked like a predator, all sharp angles and weapon batteries. Patrick had been chosen to command this monster. The responsibility felt like a mountain on his shoulders, but he accepted it without hesitation. Lisa Chang had been a theoretical physicist before the war. She had spent her career studying antimatter and how to contain it safely. Now her theories were becoming weapons. The Hellfire Array was her creation, a system that fired focused streams of antimatter at targets. Anything the beam touched simply ceased to exist at the molecular level. Lisa tried not to think about what her weapon would do to living creatures. She tried to focus on the fact that it would protect humanity. The construction pushed every human facility to absolute limits. The factories on Mars ran without stopping, their workers pulling double shifts until they collapsed from exhaustion. The shipyards in lunar orbit welded armor plates 20 hours a day. Medical teams treated workers for radiation exposure, chemical burns, and simple fatigue. People died building these ships, but more volunteers kept coming. Daniel Foster commanded the second Dragon-class ship, the Iron Storm. He had been an admiral in Earth's Navy before retirement. When the call went out for experienced commanders, he came back without question. His children tried to convince him to stay home, to let younger officers handle the fighting. Daniel told them something that made them understand. The aliens had started this war by killing the defenseless. It would end with soldiers killing soldiers. That was more fair than humanity had any right to expect. The neural command interface was necessary because ships this large couldn't be operated normally. A traditional crew would need thousands of people, and response times would be too slow for combat. Maya Sullivan designed a system that connected a commander's brain directly to the ship's computers. The officer could control weapons, shields, and engines with thought-speed precision. The downside was brutal. The interface pushed human neurons to their absolute limits. Some test subjects suffered permanent brain damage. Maya added more safety systems, but she knew the interface would still be dangerous. Patrick volunteered to be the first person to use the full interface. They strapped him into the command chair of Crimson Fury and activated the connection. For a moment he felt nothing. Then the ship flooded into his mind. He could feel the reactor cores like a heartbeat in his chest. He could sense every weapon battery like fingers he could flex. The shield generators hummed in his bones. It was overwhelming and incredible and terrifying all at once. When they disconnected him after 10 minutes, Patrick collapsed. His nose was bleeding and his head felt like it was splitting apart. The medical team rushed forward, but he waved them away. He looked at Maya and smiled through the pain. The interface worked. He could control the ship. They could do this. 5 Dragon-class warships took shape over 8 months of brutal construction. Crimson Fury was first, followed by Iron Storm, Thunderstrike, Voidbreaker, and Shadow Phoenix. Each ship carried 800 crew members. Each ship had enough firepower to destroy a small moon. They were the most powerful weapons humanity had ever created. The crew selection process was intense. Admiral Cole personally interviewed thousands of applicants. He chose people who had lost family in the attacks, people who understood what they were fighting for, people who would never hesitate when the moment came to pull the trigger. The crews trained together for months, learning their ships and learning to trust each other. Greg Palmer became weapons officer on Crimson Fury. He had been a gunner on a cargo escort before the war. Now he controlled the Hellfire array and dozens of other weapon systems. In simulations, he could paint targets and fire in under 3 seconds. Patrick told him that speed might save lives when real combat started. Greg took that responsibility seriously. Olivia Grant handled navigation for Crimson Fury. She had studied astrophysics and loved plotting courses through space. Now she plotted attack vectors and escape routes. She calculated hyperspace jumps that would bring them out of faster-than-light travel, right on top of enemy positions. Her work was mathematics, but it was also art. Every decimal point mattered. Every calculation could mean the difference between victory and death. The weapons testing happened in the outer solar system, far from inhabited stations. When Crimson Fury fired its Hellfire array for the first time, the antimatter beam carved through a nickel-iron asteroid and kept going. The asteroid simply vanished, converted to energy and scattered atoms. The beam traveled another 1,000 kilometers before dispersing. Lisa watched the test results and felt sick. Her weapon worked perfectly. It would kill millions. Admiral Cole gathered all 5 ship commanders for a final briefing before the fleet's departure. Patrick, Daniel, and the others stood around a holographic display showing the known galaxy. Red marks indicated colonies that had been attacked. Red marks covered too much of the map. Cole's voice was hard when he spoke. They weren't going out there for revenge, even though revenge was what many wanted. They were going to stop the aliens from killing anyone else. They were going to end this threat permanently. The Dragon fleet completed its final trials in January. The ships performed beyond expectations. The crews worked together like they had been doing this for years instead of months. The neural command interface proved stable enough for combat use, though the medical team still worried about long-term effects. Everything was ready. Now they just needed to find the enemy. Part 3, finding the aliens, was harder than anyone expected. They had attacked from multiple directions and disappeared just as quickly. Their ships left almost no trace in space. The military had debris from destroyed human vessels and some alien weapons fragments, but nothing that pointed to a home world or base of operations. Sophie Blake worked in intelligence analysis, and the problem was driving her crazy. The aliens had to have supply lines. They had to have staging areas. Nothing moved across space without leaving some kind of trail. The breakthrough came from the most unlikely place. A survey team found a damaged alien scout ship drifting in the outer reaches of the New Harmony system. The ship had been hit by debris during the battle and knocked off course. Its crew was dead, frozen in the vacuum, but its computers were still partially functional. The military hauled the wreck back to a research station and handed it to Raymond Wells. Raymond was a computer scientist who specialized in alien languages and code systems. Before the war, he had studied the few alien species humanity had encountered. Most of them were peaceful traders who didn't share much technology. The alien code from the scout ship was completely different. It was organic, almost alive, changing patterns constantly. Raymond spent 3 months sitting in his laboratory, sleeping 4 hours a night, eating when his assistants forced food into his hands. His wife begged him to take breaks. He told her he would rest when humanity was safe. Finally, Raymond cracked the code. The navigation computer contained coordinates for supply routes and staging areas. The aliens called themselves the Krell. They were a hive species controlled by queens who directed billions of workers and warriors. The Krell had been expanding through the galaxy for thousands of years, consuming resources from every world they found. Humans were just their latest targets. Raymond found coordinates for a forward base 40 light-years from Earth. He brought the data to Admiral Cole with shaking hands. Cole looked at the coordinates, and then at the tired scientist. He thanked Raymond for possibly saving humanity. Then he ordered the Dragon fleet to prepare for immediate departure. 5 massive warships gathered beyond Neptune's orbit, their crews ready for war. Patrick stood on the bridge of Crimson Fury and connected to the neural command interface. The ship flowed into his consciousness and he felt ready. This was what they had built for. This was why they existed. The Admiral's speech was broadcast to all 5 ships. Cole stood on Crimson Fury's command deck, his uniform crisp and his expression hard. He told them they weren't fighting for glory or conquest. They were fighting because humanity refused to die quietly. The Krell thought humans were prey, weak creatures to be harvested. It was time to teach the aliens that they had made a terrible mistake. The crews cheered and Patrick felt his heart pound with nervous energy. Traveling through hyperspace felt like dying and being reborn. The Dragon fleet ships tore holes in normal space and entered a dimension where physics worked differently. The journey would take 6 weeks to cover 40 light-years. Patrick used the time to drill his crew constantly. Greg ran weapons drills until he could hit targets in his sleep. Olivia calculated thousands of possible exit vectors. The medical teams prepared for casualties. Everyone knew the first real battle was coming. They emerged from hyperspace at combat velocity, already moving at thousands of kilometers per second. The alien base appeared on sensors immediately. It was enormous, orbiting a gas giant in the target system. The structure was 3 times larger than Earth's biggest space station. Dozens of Krell warships were docked to its hull like parasites. Patrick didn't give them time to react. The Crimson Fury's Hellfire array fired, while the aliens were still detecting the human ships. The antimatter beam carved through the base's shields like they didn't exist. Metal vaporized. Atmosphere exploded into space. Entire sections of the alien station simply ceased to exist. The Krell warships tried to launch, but Thunderstrike was already firing. Plasma lance batteries turned 3 alien vessels into expanding clouds of gas. The battle was brutal and fast. Patrick felt every weapon firing through the neural command interface. He directed drone swarms to attack alien fighters. He adjusted shield strength to compensate for incoming fire. He was the ship, and the ship was him. When an alien beam weapon hit Crimson Fury's port side, he felt it like a punch to the ribs. The armor held, but the pain was real. Daniel Foster commanded Iron Storm with cold precision. His ship took heavy damage when 2 Krell vessels focused fire on his position. The port armor buckled and 3 compartments were breached. 17 crew members died in seconds, sucked into vacuum. Daniel didn't flinch. He rotated Iron Storm to present fresh armor and returned fire. Both alien ships exploded under the assault. Shadow Phoenix had the worst luck. A Krell fighter loaded with explosives broke through the defensive screen and crashed into the ship's forward section. The explosion killed 20 crew members and knocked out 2 weapon batteries. The ship kept fighting anyway. Its captain, a woman named Julie Harper, rerouted power from life support in damaged sections to keep her remaining weapons online. She would mourn her dead later. Right now, she had a battle to win. The fight lasted 17 minutes. When it ended, the alien base was debris. 9 Krell warships were destroyed. But the Dragon fleet had paid a price. Iron Storm looked like it had been through a meat grinder, its armor shredded in multiple places. Shadow Phoenix was barely functional. Every ship reported casualties. Patrick disconnected from the neural command interface and immediately vomited. The pain from the damage his ship took was overwhelming, but they had won. More importantly, they had recovered the alien base's central computer core. The Krell used organic technology that was still partly alive. Raymond Wells began working on it immediately, racing against time as the biological system slowly died. He needed information. He needed to know where the Krell came from. Sophie Blake coordinated with Raymond, analyzing every piece of data they extracted. The Krell Empire was vast, spanning hundreds of systems. They had consumed countless species over millennia. Their technology was advanced but crude, relying on biological engineering rather than true artificial intelligence. And they were all controlled by queen organisms that directed the hive through some kind of telepathic link. Raymond finally found what they needed: coordinates for the Krell homeworld, a planet called Zarketh orbiting a red dwarf star, 60 light-years from Earth. The planet hosted the primary queen, the eldest and most powerful of the Krell leaders. If humanity could kill that queen, the entire species might collapse into chaos. It was a desperate plan, but it was the only plan they had. Admiral Cole called another conference. The fleet commanders gathered in Crimson Fury's war room, their faces tired and grim. Cole laid out the situation. They could go home now and prepare Earth's defenses, or they could press forward to Zarketh and try to end the threat at its source. The vote was unanimous. They would go to the Krell homeworld. They would finish this war before the aliens could attack Earth itself. Part 4 Zarketh looked like a nightmare world through the sensors. The planet was locked in place, always showing the same face to its red dwarf sun. One side burned under constant radiation while the other froze in eternal darkness. The habitable zone was the narrow band between light and dark, a strip of land called the Terminator. That was where the Krell had built their civilization. Billions of them lived in massive hive structures that stretched for hundreds of kilometers. The Dragon fleet spent 2 days in the outer system, repairing damage and planning their attack. Patrick walked through Crimson Fury's damaged sections, seeing the burnt metal and the empty spaces where crew members used to work. The ship felt smaller now. The war felt more real. He tried not to think about how many more people would die before this was over. Admiral Cole called the final planning session. All 5 ship commanders gathered through video link, their faces appearing on screens around the conference table. The problem was simple but terrifying. The Krell homeworld had orbital defenses that made the forward base look like a toy. Hundreds of weapons platforms, thousands of fighter craft, and somewhere in the deepest parts of the main hive was the primary queen, protected by her most powerful warriors. Daniel Foster argued for a simple solution: bombard the planet from orbit until nothing was left alive. The Krell had killed millions of humans without hesitation. They deserved the same treatment. Patrick understood the anger, but he couldn't agree. If humanity just destroyed the planet, they would become exactly what they were fighting against. They needed to strike at the leadership and force a surrender. The compromise they reached was dangerous, but it was the only option. 4 Dragon-class ships would engage the orbital defenses and draw fire away from the planet. Voidbreaker, the smallest and fastest of the Dragon ships, would descend into the atmosphere and deploy ground forces. Elite soldiers would fight their way to the Queen's chamber and kill her. It was suicide dressed up as a plan, but volunteers came forward anyway. Alan Price had been a Marine before the war. He had fought pirates in the outer colonies and rescued hostages from terrorists. He thought he understood combat. Then New Harmony fell and he realized he understood nothing. His brother had died on that colony, along with his brother's family. When the call came for volunteers to assault the Krell hive, Alan didn't hesitate. He would go into that hell and he would make the aliens pay. The assault team trained for 3 days in the Voidbreaker's cargo bay. They practiced breaching doors, clearing corridors, and fighting in close quarters. They studied the limited information humanity had about Krell biology. The warriors were heavily armored but had weak points at the joints. They communicated through sound so sonic grenades would disrupt their coordination. They were strong and fast, but they weren't invincible. 30 soldiers prepared for the mission. They wore powered armor that enhanced their strength and protected them from most weapons. They carried plasma rifles that could burn through Krell armor. They had enough ammunition for maybe an hour of sustained combat. After that, they would be fighting with knives and desperation. Alan looked at his team and felt proud. These were good people doing an impossible thing because someone had to. The Dragon fleet emerged from hyperspace at the edge of Zarketh's gravity well, weapons already charging. The Krell response was immediate. The orbital platforms activated, each one the size of a city block and covered in biological weapons. They launched swarms of living missiles, creatures bred specifically to kamikaze into enemy ships. The missiles were small and fast, impossible to hit them all. Crimson Fury's defensive systems opened fire. Lasers and particle beams created a web of death around the ship, destroying missiles by the hundreds. But there were thousands. Some got through. They impacted on the hull and exploded in bursts of acid that ate through armor. Patrick felt each hit through the neural command interface, pain shooting through his nervous system. He gritted his teeth and kept fighting. Thunderstrike took a direct hit from one of the platforms. The weapon was some kind of bioplasma that melted through shields and armor like they were butter. 3 decks were breached. 40 crew members died instantly. The ship's commander, a man named Carl Dixon, routed emergency power to seal the breach. Thunderstrike kept firing, its graviton disruptor shattering weapons platforms into atoms. Void Breaker made its run toward the planet while the other ships provided cover. The assault ship's armor was designed for atmospheric entry at extreme speeds. It hit the upper atmosphere at Mach 40, the hull screaming as friction turned the air to plasma. The ship's pilot, a woman named Kate Morrison, fought to keep the vessel stable as it plunged toward the surface like a meteor. They landed near the main hive entrance, the ship's thrusters kicking up a storm of dust and rock. The rear ramp dropped before they had fully stopped. Alan and his team charged out into the alien world. The air was thin and smelled like sulfur. The hive entrance loomed ahead, a massive organic structure that looked like it had grown rather than been built. Alan activated his suit's external speakers and shouted for his team to move. The Krell were waiting for them. Warriors poured out of the hive entrance, their weapons raised and their mandibles clicking in rage. Alan opened fire, his plasma rifle burning through the first alien's chest. The creature fell, but 3 more took its place. The battle became chaos immediately. The soldiers fought their way forward meter by meter. Plasma fire lit up the dim landscape. Krell warriors charged in waves, fearless and relentless. The humans used their superior firepower and coordination to cut the aliens down, but the cost was terrible. 5 soldiers died in the first 10 minutes, then 8 more. Alan watched his friends fall and kept moving forward. They had a mission. They had to reach the Queen. Inside the hive, the corridors were narrow and dark. The walls were made of some kind of living material that felt warm to the touch. Strange lights pulsed in the ceiling, casting everything in shades of red and purple. The air was humid and hard to breathe even through the armor's filters. Alan led his team deeper, following the route that intelligence had mapped from the captured computer data. They fought through ambush after ambush. The Krell warriors were defending their home and their queen. They came from side passages and dropped from ceiling vents. They used the tight spaces to their advantage, forcing the humans into close combat where their claws and mandibles were deadly. Alan's armor saved his life 6 times. He lost count of how many aliens he killed. 8 hours after entering the hive, only 15 soldiers were still alive. They had gone through most of their ammunition. Several team members were injured, fighting on through pain and determination, but they were close. The corridors were getting wider, and the walls showed signs of important architecture. They were approaching the Queen's chamber. The final door was massive, 3 meters thick and covered in organic armor. Alan's demolition expert, a young man named Chris Baker, placed charges around the frame. Everyone took cover as the explosives detonated. The door didn't explode so much as it died, the living material shuddering and falling apart. Beyond the door was a chamber the size of an aircraft hangar. And in the center was the Queen. She was enormous, easily 20 meters long and 10 meters tall. Her body was bloated with egg sacs and covered in thick armor. Around her were thousands of warrior Krell, the elite guards of the hive. They looked at the humans with hatred in their compound eyes. Alan raised his rifle and gave the order. The remaining soldiers opened fire with everything they had. Plasma bolts and grenades filled the chamber. The Queen screamed, a sound that made the walls vibrate. The warriors charged as one unified mass. The humans fought like cornered animals, knowing they would die but determined to complete their mission. The battle in the Queen's chamber lasted 20 minutes. When the smoke cleared, the Queen was dead. So were all but 4 of the soldiers. Alan was alive, barely, his armor cracked and his body broken. But they had done it. The mission was complete. Part 5, the change happened almost instantly. Across the entire planet of Zarketh, billions of Krell suddenly stopped what they were doing. The workers in the factories dropped their tools. The warriors in the streets lowered their weapons. The ships in orbit ceased firing. The hive mind had been severed. Without the Queen to direct them, the Krell were lost and confused. Patrick watched from Crimson Fury's bridge as the alien defenses went silent. At first, he thought it was a trick. The Krell could be planning a massive counterattack. But sensors showed the aliens just floating in space, their ships drifting without guidance. The neural command interface let him feel his ship's weapons still charged and ready. He kept them pointed at the enemy vessels, but he didn't fire. Something had changed. The signal came from Void Breaker 20 minutes later. Alan's voice was weak and broken, but the words were clear. The Queen was dead. The mission was successful. Only 4 soldiers survived out of 30 who had entered the hive. Patrick closed his eyes and felt the weight of those losses. 26 people who would never go home. 26 families who would receive bad news. But their sacrifice had ended the war. Admiral Cole ordered the fleet to hold position and observe. The Krell ships in orbit were still dangerous even if they weren't attacking. If the aliens regained their coordination, the battle could start again. The Dragon fleet maintained combat readiness, but minutes turned into hours and the Krell did nothing. They simply drifted in space like ships without crews. Raymond Wells analyzed the data they were receiving from Krell communications. The signals were chaotic and confused. Individual Krell were trying to communicate with each other, but without the Queen's guidance, they couldn't coordinate. Some were panicking. Some were shutting down completely. The hive mind structure that had made them so dangerous was now their greatest weakness. They were like a body whose brain had been removed. The decision to leave them alive was controversial. Daniel Foster wanted to destroy every Krell ship and sterilize the planet. These aliens had killed millions of humans without mercy. They deserved extinction. But Patrick argued for a different approach. Humanity had come here to stop a threat, not commit genocide. The Krell were no longer a danger. Destroying them now would make humans no better than the monsters they fought. Admiral Cole made the final call. The Dragon fleet would withdraw. The Krell would be left to their fate. Without their queen and their hive structure, they would either evolve a new way of living or they would die out naturally. Either way, they would never threaten humanity again. The decision satisfied no one completely, but it was the right choice. War was about protecting people, not taking revenge. Thunderstrike didn't survive the journey home. The damage from the orbital battle was too severe. 3 days after leaving Zarketh, the ship's reactor containment began to fail. Carl Dixon ordered an evacuation, but there wasn't enough time. The reactor breached while half the crew was still aboard. The antimatter explosion was visible from 100,000 kilometers away. The other Dragon ships could only watch as Thunderstrike and 400 people vanished in a flash of light. The surviving ships limped back toward Earth. Shadow Phoenix had to be towed by Crimson Fury, its engines completely dead. Iron Storm looked like it had been through a shredder, holes punched through its hull in a dozen places. Voidbreaker was in better shape, but its crew was traumatized. The soldiers who survived the hive assault weren't sleeping. They weren't talking. They just stared at nothing with empty eyes. Patrick spent the 3-month journey home in and out of medical care. The neural command interface had damaged his nervous system. He had seizures, migraines that lasted for days, vision problems. The doctors said the damage might be permanent. Patrick didn't complain. He was alive. That was more than many people could say. When the Dragon fleet finally reached Earth orbit, the planet erupted in celebration. Every screen showed footage of the battered warships returning home. The news called them heroes. Parades were planned. Medals would be given. Humanity had faced extinction and survived. They had fought back against impossible odds and won. But Patrick didn't feel like a hero. He felt tired and old and broken. He attended the memorial service for Thunderstrike's crew and watched their families cry. He visited the hospital where Alan and the other surviving soldiers were recovering. He wrote letters to the families of crew members who died on Crimson Fury. Each letter was harder than the last. The United Earth Council called him to Geneva for a formal report. Patrick stood before the assembled leaders in his dress uniform, his body held straight through willpower alone. He detailed the battle at the forward base. He described the assault on Zarketh. He explained the death of the Queen and the collapse of the Krell threat. The council members listened in silence. President Laura Manning asked the question everyone was thinking. Was it worth it? 3 million humans dead in the initial attacks, 12,000 more killed during the counteroffensive. The economic cost was staggering. The Dragon fleet had pushed human industry to its breaking point. Some colonies were struggling with basic supplies. The war had cost more than anyone wanted to admit. Patrick took his time answering. He thought about New Harmony burning. He thought about Kyle Bennett's last stand and Helen Carter's final message. He thought about the crews who died in space and the soldiers who died in the hive. He thought about the Dragon fleet and what it represented. Then he spoke. The Krell thought humans were easy prey. They attacked colonies full of civilians and expected humanity to surrender. Instead, humans built weapons that terrified even themselves. They traveled into the heart of the alien empire. They fought battles against overwhelming odds. They ended the threat permanently. Was it worth it? Patrick looked at President Manning and told her to ask the colonies that wouldn't be attacked tomorrow. Ask the children who would grow up safe. The council voted to maintain the Dragon Fleet as a permanent defense force. The remaining 4 warships would be repaired and upgraded. New crews would be trained. Humanity would never again be caught unprepared. The dragons would stand guard over human space, a warning to anyone who thought about attacking. Patrick returned to Crimson Fury as its permanent commander. Sophie Blake joined him as his executive officer, her intelligence skills too valuable to lose. Greg Palmer stayed on weapons. Olivia Grant continued as navigator. They were a crew forged in fire, scarred but unbroken. The ship felt different now. The corridors echoed with the ghosts of people who hadn't come home. But it was still their ship, still their duty. The Dragon Fleet left Earth orbit 3 months after returning. They headed toward the outer colonies on patrol. Patrick connected to the neural command interface despite the pain it caused. The ship flowed into his mind and he felt whole again. Crimson Fury accelerated smoothly, its weapons ready and its armor repaired. They were going back to work. Far across the galaxy, other alien species watched Earth's transmissions and analyzed the data from Zarketh. The humans had seemed so peaceful and eager for friendship. But when pushed, they responded with controlled fury. They built weapons that could crack planets. They fought with a determination that bordered on madness. They refused to surrender even when death seemed certain. The galaxy took note of this new species. Several alien empires quietly revised their expansion plans to avoid human space. A few began reaching out with genuine diplomatic offers. Everyone understood the same lesson. Humanity could be peaceful, but they were not harmless. Push them too far and they would push back with everything they had. Part 6. 5 years passed after the Krell War ended. The Dragon Fleet continued its patrol routes through human space, visiting colonies and showing the flag. The massive warships became symbols of both protection and warning. Children grew up drawing pictures of Crimson Fury and Iron Storm. Veterans of the war tried to rebuild their lives. Humanity slowly healed from the wounds the Krell had inflicted. Patrick Hughes still commanded Crimson Fury. The neural command interface had left permanent damage to his nervous system. He walked with a cane now, and his hands shook when he was tired. But when he connected to the ship, all those problems faded away. He became something more than human. His mind merged with the most powerful weapon humanity had ever built. The medical officers said he should retire. Patrick ignored them. The colonies that survived the Krell attacks were thriving again. New Harmony had been resettled, though the new colonists lived under the shadow of what happened there. Monuments stood in every city, listing the names of the 3 million who died. Jacob Morris's name was there, along with Helen Carter and Kyle Bennett. Their sacrifice was remembered. Their world lived again. Alan Price never fully recovered from the assault on the Krell hive. He retired from military service with full honors and tried to live a normal life, but normal felt wrong after what he experienced. He started a support group for veterans, people who understood what it was like to see friends die and to kill without hesitation. The group met every week in a small building near the lunar base. They didn't talk much about the war. They just sat together and remembered they weren't alone. The other alien species in the galaxy approached humanity carefully. The peaceful traders who had sold goods to human colonies before the war returned with diplomatic missions. They offered technology exchanges and cultural programs. Some were genuinely friendly. Others were clearly trying to figure out how dangerous humans really were. The diplomats from Earth handled each contact carefully, knowing that humanity's reputation was a weapon in itself. A species called the Viridian Collective sent ambassadors to Earth with a proposal. They had been fighting their own war against an aggressive empire called the Sarkathi. The Collective wanted to hire the Dragon Fleet as mercenaries. They offered incredible amounts of money and technology. Admiral Cole rejected the offer immediately. The Dragon Fleet was not for hire. It existed to protect humanity, not to fight other people's wars. But the offer revealed something important. The galaxy was full of conflicts and threats. The Krell had not been unique. They were just one aggressive species among many. Humanity needed to stay strong and vigilant. The peace they enjoyed was fragile and could shatter at any moment. Lisa Chang continued her weapons research, though the work haunted her dreams. She had created the Hellfire Array and watched it kill millions of Krell. The weapon was necessary, but that didn't make it clean. She started working on defensive technologies instead, trying to build shields that could protect colonies without requiring massive warships. If humanity could defend without always relying on overwhelming firepower, maybe they could avoid becoming the monsters they fought. Raymond Wells became humanity's chief expert on alien civilizations. He studied every species humans encountered, learning their languages and cultures. His work on the Krell computer systems had saved humanity. Now he used those same skills to build understanding between species. He believed that knowledge was the best defense. If humans understood their neighbors, they could avoid future wars. The Dragon Fleet got a new addition in the 5th year after the war. A 6th ship was completed, larger and more advanced than the original 5. It was named Thunderstrike in honor of the ship and crew that died at Zarketh. The new Thunderstrike had improved armor and more powerful weapons. Its neural command interface was safer, with better protection for the commander's mind. The ship represented humanity's commitment to never be caught unprepared again. Patrick attended the Thunderstrike's launch ceremony. He stood with Daniel Foster and the other surviving commanders, watching the new warship leave the construction dock. The ship was beautiful and terrible, a symbol of everything humanity had learned from the war. They had learned that peace required strength. They had learned that kindness without the ability to defend itself was just weakness. They had learned that sometimes violence was the only language that aggressive species understood. A new threat appeared in Year 6. Long-range sensors detected unknown ships entering human space from the galactic east. The vessels were large and moved in organized formations. They didn't respond to hails and didn't match any known species in the database. Admiral Cole ordered the Dragon Fleet to intercept. Crimson Fury and Iron Storm reached the unknown ships first. Patrick studied the sensor data carefully. The vessels were strange, using technology that seemed organic like the Krell but more advanced. They were clearly warships covered in weapons and armor, but they weren't attacking. They were just moving through space on a steady course. Sophie Blake tried every communication frequency she could think of. Finally, one of the alien ships responded. The message was audio only, translated through sophisticated computers. The voice that came through was deep and strange, speaking in tones that hurt human ears. But the words were clear enough. The aliens called themselves the Hierarchy. They were explorers and catalogers traveling the galaxy to document all intelligent life. They had heard about humanity's war with the Krell. They wanted to meet the species that had defeated such a dangerous threat. They came in peace, but they came prepared for war just in case. They understood that trust had to be earned. Patrick made a decision that would affect humanity's future. He invited the Hierarchy ships to Earth for formal diplomatic contact, but he kept the Dragon Fleet at full combat readiness. The weapons were powered down but ready to fire in seconds. The shields were on standby. If the Hierarchy betrayed them, humanity would respond immediately. The diplomatic meetings took months. The Hierarchy representatives were tall and thin, with skin like silver metal and eyes that glowed with internal light. They shared star charts and historical records. They told humanity about dozens of other species, some peaceful and some dangerous. They warned about the Sarkathi Empire that the Viridian Collective had mentioned. They offered membership in a loose alliance of species who valued peace but maintained strong defenses. President Manning consulted with Admiral Cole and the Earth Council. Joining an alien alliance was a huge step. It would change humanity's place in the galaxy forever. But staying isolated was also dangerous. The Krell had proven that. Humanity needed allies and information if they wanted to survive in a hostile universe. Earth joined the Hierarchy's alliance with careful conditions. Humanity would maintain full independence. The Dragon Fleet would never be put under alien command. Human colonies would be protected by human ships. But humanity would share information and coordinate defenses with allied species. It was a compromise that satisfied most people. Patrick stood on Crimson Fury's bridge 5 months after the alliance was formed. The ship was on patrol near the edge of human space, watching for threats. Sophie came to stand beside him, looking out at the stars through the main viewport. They had come a long way from the desperate days after New Harmony fell. Humanity was stronger now, wiser, ready for whatever came next. But the scars remained. Patrick still had nightmares about the battles. He still felt the pain from the neural command interface. He still saw the faces of crew members who died under his command. The war had changed him in ways that would never heal. It had changed all of humanity. A message came through from Earth. New colonies were being established in 3 systems that the hierarchy had confirmed were safe. Families were signing up to start fresh lives on new worlds. Children were being born who would never know Earth except through history lessons. Humanity was growing, spreading through the galaxy with cautious optimism. The Dragon Fleet would watch over them all. Crimson Fury, Iron Storm, Shadow Phoenix, Voidbreaker, and the new Thunderstrike. 5 ships and 4,000 crew members standing guard over billions of humans. It wasn't enough to protect everyone everywhere, but it was enough to make attackers think twice. It was enough to buy time for help to arrive. It was enough to send a message. Patrick connected to the neural command interface and felt the ship respond to his thoughts. The weapon systems hummed with ready power. The engines could accelerate to combat speed in seconds. The armor could take tremendous punishment and keep fighting. Crimson Fury was ready for war, even while hoping for peace. That was humanity's new position in the galaxy. Ready to fight but hoping never to need it. Strong enough to survive but wise enough to seek peace. Scarred by war but not broken. The Krell had struck human colonies expecting easy prey. Instead, they found a species that refused to die. They found creatures who would build weapons that frightened even themselves if that was what survival required. The galaxy had learned a valuable lesson. Humanity was dangerous when threatened, but they were also capable of mercy, choosing to spare the Krell rather than commit genocide. Other species studied this carefully. The humans were not mindless warriors. They were thinking beings who used violence only when necessary. That made them unpredictable and